Today's presenter is Feroz Arif. Feroz is the head of delivery for the APJ region for Utopia. So with that, Feroz, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Terry. Good morning, everyone. I'm Feroz Arif, and I've been with Utopia for about 7 years now, since 2005. And I've worked on various data migration projects, and I have close to about 25 years of experience. Though I might sound young, I am actually 49 years old, and I have had a lot of experience in the industry. And today I will share with you some of our experiences in data migration and some of the lessons that we have learned doing data migration for various organizations, which include companies like ExxonMobil, Saudi Arabian Airlines, Malaysian Airlines, Suncor Energy, to name a few. And based on the lessons learned, what are some of the different best practices that we have come up with. So this is what I will be sharing. And the way what I will do is actually just walk you through a scenario which will kind of highlight some of the problems that we face as a part of data migration, some of the idiosyncrasies of data migration, and then we would take a look at data migration up close. People typically talk about all these from, let's say, a 30,000 feet over a view, but I'm going to try and go down to the lowest level so that you understand what exactly happens in data migration and the impact of that on the process itself. And then I will share with you some of the best practices and the lessons learned, and then we will close up with questions. We will open up the floor for questions towards the end, and then you can ask questions. And as Terry mentioned, throughout the webinar, you can keep asking questions using the chat window and things like that, and I will try and answer as many of them at the end of the presentation. So let's get moving. This is a typical a scene from a data migration project. It's 11:55 p.m. on a Sunday night, and go live is set for 8 a.m. on Monday morning. And vendor masters are being loaded, and 30,000 of the vendors have loaded without a hitch, and suddenly 10,000 vendors fail to load. People immediately check the load logs, and they discover that 10,000 vendors are missing bank accounts. And this customer perhaps is implementing automated payments to vendors, and the bank accounts are mandatory. So now, without this information, the data will not load. You will not be able to load this data into the target system. And neither can any program or logic determine what is the bank account number for a particular vendor. So then people realize that this has to be obtained manually. And since they do not have the information, and since they are not able to load the data into the system, they have to, the go live gets delayed, and it is pushed back by a month as the team puts together a manual process to maybe call up the vendors and get their bank account details. This might be a kind of a worst case kind of a scenario, but it can happen. And why would such a thing happen? What is the reason for this thing to happen? Such things happen when we don't understand the gap between the source and the target, the data gap. So if you don't understand what is required at the target side and what is available in the source, then you will not be able to bridge that gap. This is something which is kind of specific to data. Also, data is full of surprises. Unlike any other, say, application, implementation or something, here we are talking about individual sets of records, and each record can have its own content and its own level of quality. So just because 10 records are of good quality doesn't mean that the subsequent 99 records are going to be of the same quality. This is a characteristic of data. Another characteristic is that data issues require different types of solutions. Each issue of data, there are different data issues, and each one requires a different solution. One size does not fit all. So, like for instance, in the previous example that I gave you, there you needed a manual process to be able to get the vendor's bank account numbers. These are something which no software program or anything can provide you, your vendor's bank account number. And of course, there are other solutions for other issues. Maybe there are some data cleansing which needs to be done, where you need to remove some non-standard characters or something. Those kind of tasks perhaps can be automated. But there might be some other areas where data is missing, and there, for you to be able to obtain that data, you will have to adopt a different kind of a method. So now let's take a look at what exactly happens within in data migration. Like if we go down to a record level, what exactly is happening there? Okay, so here we have a setup where we have a few sources, okay, and you could have multiple sources. These could be systems, or it could be even different files, okay, and say there is some information. These are, let's say, assume some descriptions of some materials which are to be loaded into your target system's material master. These are available in two separate sources. And what the first step is, of course, to extract that data from these different sources. And now you can see here, that some of these, symbols here, like this dollar sign or the percentage sign and the question mark and the hash, these actually represent some non-standard characters which could appear within your data. So one of the first steps that you do is to actually clean that data, to remove all these kind of non-standard characters, all right? And once you've cleaned that data, then you do something which is called standardization, okay? So, for instance, let us say if you had address data, or where, you've got different addresses, and in one of the records it says ROAD, in the other record it says RD, or there is a street which is spelled out as ST in some records. So there is a need to standardize that data. And if you see this particular step here, here is where we are doing that kind of a standardization. Just to represent that standardization, you can see, let's say this 7, which was the third character in this particular string, has been moved to the front. Similarly, here also the 7 has moved to the front, and this is the order in which all these different pieces of data should appear. So this is one process which is called standardization, and it is done to the data. And then we also realize, if you see here, that some pieces of data are missing, okay? So we need to go through an enrichment process where we will add this piece of data to this information. If we go back to the material master example, the material description example, let us say you have a ball bearing or something like that. Now, to define a ball bearing, you would need to have, say, of course, you have to say that the major group is bearing and the subgroup is ball, because you could have a bearing which is also a roller bearing, different types of bearings. And now for a ball bearing, you also have certain attributes, like maybe there is an inside diameter, there is an outside diameter, excuse me. So those pieces of information need to be a part of the description if you are to uniquely identify that particular part. So if that information, let's say an inner diameter is missing, then you need to get that piece of information and enrich the data, okay? And once this is done, now you see here that these two records seem to be the same one. So this is also another thing which needs to be done, where you will deduplicate the data so that you end up with just one single record. And once this record has been deduped, then you would transform it, because the same set, the same data which was there in your source will not actually fit your target, okay? There has to be some kind of a transformation. For instance, let us say UOMs, unit of measure. In your target system, you might have an UOM which is kilograms, and in your source system maybe you had an UOM which was pounds. So this pounds needs to be transformed to kilograms before it becomes acceptable to load into the target system. So once the data has been transformed, then you can upload or import that data into the target system. So here there is one thing which I would like to highlight. Typically when you have an SI who is involved in, let's say, implementing your application, then when they talk about data migration, they're talking only about this particular part, this particular area. To them, this is what is data migration. Taking the data and then using whatever upload or import programs that are available on your application and then loading the data into the target system. That is data migration to them. But actually data migration is this whole host of all different things that need to be done, which will then ensure that your data gets loaded into the target system. And when people do not understand and appreciate this, then what happens? Like SAP has done, the ASUG, the American SAP user group had done a survey on the data issues in projects, and they discovered that 93% of the people surveyed spoke about significant data management issues, and these issues occur because of people underestimating what is actually required in a data migration project. Okay, and the interesting thing is also that more than 75% of the respondents experienced data management issues late in the project life cycle. Okay, so supposing if you had identified a problem early, then you had plenty of time to fix it, right? Suppose you identified it at the project prep phase, then you have time right up until, let's say, your final prep to be able to fix that issue. But if you identified something at the final prep phase, then perhaps you had some time until the go live and support phase to be able to fix it. But supposing if you identified something only at the go live phase, where, like the previous example which I gave you of the vendor master, then you have absolutely no time to fix that issue, and it will definitely then delay your go live. And of course you can also have issues after go live. You could have issues with the data which will affect the user's acceptance of your system, and those issues also need to be fixed, right? So given this kind of a scenario, and when people underestimate what needs to be done in the data migration area, so what do we do? How do we mitigate all these risks? How do we de-risk a data migration project? Okay, one of the first things that you need to do is profile the data. All right, you need to profile the data and understand what are all the different problems which are there within the source system, right? So you could have, like what we saw earlier, you could have data quality issues in terms of, the actual quality of the data itself. The data could be incomplete, or depending, then again when you compare it with the requirements of the target system, maybe there are certain fields which are mandatory in the target, but the data is not available in the source system. Okay, so those kind of issues and all those things will be identified through your data profiling. Then you, during the blueprint phase, or when this is the phase where you're doing your analysis, this is when you start assessing the different business rules with respect to the target application, and you start putting together the data quality business rules which will be used to ensure that you get the right sort of data quality in when you load the data into your target system. Then once you have obtained all these the different rules, and you've understood all the different issues, and then you build your data migration framework, then you can start loading your cleanse and transform data into the target applications and start testing to see how well the data fits into the target system. And throughout the process, right from the beginning to the end, you do need to have data governance. All right, the data governance is basically a structure for making decisions regarding the data, and this would involve things like identifying different data owners for each of the different data objects that you are seeking to migrate from your source to your target system. Right? So you have to assign responsibility to people. You have to give them the authority to be able to take decisions. Right? So data governance needs to be a part of this particular structure, this particular process right from the beginning. And once all this is done, this is going to then reduce your project risk. It's going to lower your project costs, and it will eliminate your late surprises, which actually will lead to cost overruns, missed timelines, and of course rework. Okay. Now, this is the what should I say, the theory behind the whole this thing. So this needs to be excuse me, implemented practically, and the way to do that to ensure that none of these things gets missed out, you need to have a proper methodology in place. So there are various methodologies available, and I'm showing you one of the proven data migration methodologies, and this is very similar or it kind of maps onto the ASAP methodology for which is used by SAP to implement SAP, right? And again, it makes sense for this data migration methodology also to map onto the ASAP methodology, because data is definitely a key requirement for any SAP implementation. So here again you will see that it has it starts off with the project preparation, then you have the business blueprint which leads on to realization, final prep, and then finally go live and support. So in the project prep phase, we scope, we identify what are all the different source systems, what are all the objects which are required for the target system, and what are all the different issues. We identify the data requirements, okay, and then once we've identified the data requirements, then we start assessing the source data in terms of the requirements to identify all the data gaps. And then we, during the business blueprint phase itself, we then start looking at the remediation that is required to ensure that the right sort of data quality is available in the load data, okay, and then we get into the realization phase, which is where we will build the jobs, we'll build the programs and everything, which will implement the the different business rules and the data quality rules that have been given, and then we will prepare the data load. So here, once the data load files are made available in the final prep phase, then the trial data loads start. So once data is loaded into the system, then you can validate the results and then see what are all the different issues, fix them during this particular phase, and then during go live, load the data into the target production system, and you can go live. So this is a general proven data migration methodology, all right, which is practiced, which ensures that all the previous things that we spoke about are taken care of, and you will be able to get the best quality data at the time of go live. Okay. Now, to be able to use this methodology, you also need to have a kind of a framework in place, and based on our experience, this is actually the framework that we use for our projects. Okay. Here you can see on the right hand side you have the target environment, which is, let's say in this case, SAP, and you have the legacy data environment, which comprises of various flat files, Excel files, databases, applications, and even XML. And now all this data is actually extracted into a staging area. Now this is also a best practice, right? So you can actually take this data and directly put it into the target system. But the best practice dictates that you should extract this data, put it into a staging area where you can, profile the data and then cleanse the data, okay, then transform and validate the data. Okay, so here you can see the validation is done against the configuration of the SAP system. Many times and this is an important point for this particular framework and methodology, because many times people will load the data directly into the SAP system. Once they have created the load files at this particular phase, they will load it into SAP and then check to see what is the quality of data when, based on the SAP logs. So this has two different issues. One, it takes a lot of time, to load the data into SAP. Loading data into SAP is an expensive process, and also it depends upon the availability of hardware and all those things, and whether you have test systems available, and whether you can load the data inside it. And in SAP, once data gets loaded into SAP, then deleting it is difficult. You'll have to do something like flag for deletion, etc. And then and wiping the system clean is also a process, and there are various issues involved in that. So that itself is a kind of an expensive and time-consuming process. And not only that, sometimes the SAP load logs, they are cryptic. You won't be able to identify what the particular issue is, and also SAP will stop loading at the first error within a particular record. If there are subsequent fields which have issues, then SAP will not provide you details of those errors. You will have to fix the error with a particular field, and then later on try and load the data again to get the next error with the next field. Again, of course, there are ways in which you can overcome this, and you can load data into SAP and identify the different issues, but an easier way is to do it within this staging area itself. Like, let's say if it takes you 3 hours to load the data into SAP and identify the issues, within a matter of maybe 3 minutes you will be able to use this particular methodology to be able to identify what are all the issues. This setup will take a look, will look at the record, identify all the different issues with each and every single field, and provide you with a report which is very user readable, right, like in English, and this can be shared with the business, who can then fix the issues and then provide the data again to us, so that we can run through the process and then get a validated load file which can then be loaded into SAP. The framework has two different ways of loading data into SAP. One is it can generate, say, standard LSMW files, or it can use iDocs and directly load the data into SAP. Some other aspects are, of course, reconciliation. This is a pretty important point as well. Okay, you need to reconcile between the source and the target to ensure that all the required data that was identified in the source has been loaded into SAP and nothing has been missed out, and that is done through the reconciliation. Okay. Of course, we can also build dashboards and different kinds of business reporting on top of this particular framework, including performance analysis. We can have regular reports. When customers, when business people cleanse the data, then you can use this framework to keep track of that cleansing process. How many records have been cleansed? How many are still having issues? And that can be used to track the progress of the cleansing activity, and then identify if there are any issues and they need to be fixed. So that also is a part of the framework. And one of the key things about this particular framework is it allows for transparency, communication, and governance, which is a key requirement for any data migration framework. Okay, so this is one of the best practices data migration framework that we use. So now coming to the best practices for data migration based on our experience, what are some of the different things that you should do? One is determine the purpose of your data. Okay, now, okay, actually I would take number 6 and put it up front as number 1. Okay, you do need to take responsibility for your data migration. There are organizations like ours and various others who can do the data migration, who have the requisite skills, the tool sets and everything to do the data migration, but the data, but as an organization, you do need to take responsibility for your data migration. It's not something like you pick a few set of people and throw the data at them and they will fix it, and whatever issues are there, they will be able to resolve them and provide you with good quality data. No, it will not happen like that. They will have to work very closely with you and your team to be able to identify all the different issues, and then work with your team to identify what are all the different rules that are required to ensure that the best sort of data quality is available to be loaded into the target system. Okay, and one of the parts of taking responsibility for your data migration is to determine the purpose of your data. Now, say for instance, master data in a system like SAP has certain additional functions that it performs. So it is not just like, let's say if you take a vendor, it's not just the vendor's name and address. There are certain other requirements on the SAP side which need to be catered to. Like for instance, SAP gives you various partner functions. It gives you the capability of having different build to, ship to, and those kind of features. So to be able to take advantage of all that, you need to understand how the data will fit into the target system and what function does it do within that system, right? Then of course you need to do an as-is assessment before moving the data. That is what we spoke about earlier, profiling right at the beginning of the data migration project. You need to profile your data, you need to understand what are all the different issues, and then you need to account for data quality in your legacy systems. So within your legacy system, you need to identify what are all the different data quality issues. Like there may be issues which, there are two types of data quality issues. One is data quality issues whereby a set of data cannot be loaded into a target system because the target system's requirements are not being met. The other is within your legacy system itself, you might have various data quality issues. So you might have an issue like say duplicates, or maybe incomplete information, invalid information, obsolete records. All these things need to be taken care of within the legacy system itself. Okay, then you need to validate and redefine the business rules that are used to transform your data, right? So this is where related to it is also like the governance rules that needs to be established early, and identifying who is responsible for the data. So these are the people who will now define the business rules, who understand what is the requirement of the data in the target system, and then come up with the rules to say that these are the different rules that should be applied to this data set so that it can be loaded into the target system. Then of course I moved point 6 to point number 1, right? And then of course do not rely 100% on the tool. Okay, it's not that the tool can do everything. Like the first example that I gave you, no tool, no software can provide you with the information which is specific to your vendors. You do need to pick up the phone, call them, and record that information, and then load it into maybe an Excel sheet or something, and then provide it to whoever will then load the data into your system, right? Then an important point is to keep validating the data throughout the process. Continuously keep on validating the data, and whenever you identify any issues, fix them and then revalidate the data. Another best practice is engage the business. Okay, data migration is not a technical issue, right? It's not a technical problem that needs to be resolved, right? If it is a business issue, the quality of data is determined by business. What data, the data requirement is determined by the business, and you need to engage and involve them in this particular process. Like for instance, okay, I have got 60,000 vendors. Like we had a customer back in Calgary who had about 60,000 vendors, and and they were planning to like migrate the 60,000 vendors to the target system. So at that particular point in time, one of the consultants asked the business, like, do you need all these 60,000 vendors in your new system? Is there any way in which we can reduce this? And then, they came up with a rule to say that, okay, if we have not conducted any business during the past 18 months with any of these vendors, let's not bring them over to the new system. And if, let us say, the volume of business transacted with each of these vendors was less than $50,000, then let's not bring them into the target system. So these kind of rules the business came up with, then these rules were applied, and then from 60,000 that entire data set reduced to about 11,000 records. And these 11,000 records were checked by the business, and they said, okay, fine, these are the vendors that we need, let's move these 11,000 vendors to a target, right? So this is just one example of where you engage with the business. Actually, in every single phase for every single object, you need to engage with the business, because they are the ones who know what is they are the ones who know the data, who understand the data quality, and we as technology people can engage with them. And of course, since we know what are the requirements for the data migration, we can guide them, right? But a lot of decisions and everything need to be taken by the business, all right? And of course, another best practice is to measure the impact of any activity of let's say, even of data quality. Now, if you want to get, let us say, 100% data quality, that is something which is very difficult to achieve, right? The amount of effort and time that is required to come up with 100% data quality is very high. So whenever you are faced with a particular issue, you need to determine the impact of that particular issue on the functionality of your target system, on the acceptance of your target system, and then decide what you will do to remediate. So whether you are going to go whole hog and say, okay, no, I have to fix every single issue, or no, I will fix only about 50% or 70% of the issues, and that is sufficient for me to make sure that the data gets moved into the target system and I will be able to use it effectively. So these are some of the best practices for data migration. And in summary, if you ask me what is the recipe for data migration, it is a mix of all these things, right? You need to have the right sort of tools. You need to have, say, templates and accelerators to be able to, quickly do certain things. You, of course, need to have the expertise, and here it's not only technical expertise, but it's also, business knowledge, business expertise, and all these things need to be melded into a methodology. So you need to have a proper methodology to bring all these three things together to ensure that your data migration is successful. Okay. So that again, one more thing before I finish my presentation. See, all these different things that we have spoken about, you can see them in action in our a unique facility that Utopia has created. We call this Utopia Labs. It is the first of its kind demo center for various data solutions which are available. So just under one roof you can see data migration solutions, MDM solutions, mobility solutions, HANA solutions, HANA on the cloud, archival related solutions, data governance solutions, and then structured and unstructured data, how we handle that. And this Utopia Labs is also a center of excellence for our major delivery capabilities. It is on the cloud, okay, so it is not something you have to physically visit, but you can experience it and you can understand some of these solutions, and you can talk to us about how we can showcase some of the issues that you're facing and how we can resolve them in Utopia Labs. So that kind of brings me to the end of my presentation. And Terry, we can open the floor for questions.
Great. So the floor is now open for questions. You can enter any questions in the question pane of your GoToWebinar toolbar. We did have a few Feroz come in during the presentation. And I believe you addressed this, but maybe you could talk a little bit more to it. At what point should you stop validating the data? When it's 100% clean prior to UAT or right up until the go live?
I think, see, it depends upon how you're going to, the mechanics of loading the data. Now, for instance, see, data migration is a slightly longer process, right? It takes maybe 6 to 9 months when you migrate the data, and you extract data at different points in time. Okay, so let's say you have extracted data, you have assessed your data at the beginning of your project. Now what happens is, as your project is running, people are creating more sets of data, they are creating, say, new vendors, new customers, new materials and things like that. So that data will need to get validated again. So, but of course there will be a certain period where you will stop all data entry into the new system, and then at that point you will do an extract, and at that same point you can do a validation of the data and then load it into the target system. All the validations and everything that you do and the issues that you face should actually be kind of built into the framework, so that you will be able to run them, automatically without any major issues. So to me, I would say right up until maybe the final prep phase, you would do your validations, and then you would call for a data freeze, and after that data freeze, I don't think you would do any further validations.
Okay, our next question. Would you recommend for extract the ETL tool doing an OBDC connection, or have the legacy owners extract the data?
Again, it depends. I'm sorry to say that, but see, let's say there's a mainframe system. Okay, so in the mainframe, you're not able to connect your ETL tool to the mainframe, or it doesn't have capabilities to connect and extract the data. For instance, the tool that we use, which is data services, it's able to connect to different mainframes and extract from different complex structures like the COBOL copy book or something. So then you can use the tool to extract it. But if you don't have that facility, then you should ask for the customer to export the data out and give it to you.
Okay. How can you decrease the time it generally takes to complete a data migration project?
Okay. By following all these best practices that I spoke about. That is one way to definitely reduce the time. And of course, it's in preparation, in preparing for it, in understanding what are all the different challenges, and carrying out, those different things like your data profiling, and then having the right sort of tool and framework available to you, right? These are the things which will reduce the time which is required for data migration. And see, again, the tool and the framework, they play a very important role in determining the duration of your project. What happens, see, in our experience, we've seen in, let's say, these SAP data migration projects, towards the end of the project, there are still changes coming in. And if you are to be able to, quickly implement those changes and fix your data and come up with a new load file and things like that, for that you need to have a very good data migration framework in place, and where you will be able to control what is being done to the data without any major issues, right? So that's where the tool and the framework actually come into place. So one is like following, if you want to reduce the duration for your data migration one is have the right methodology, do the right things like data profiling, etc., and have a good quality migration framework available in place. These are the two things.